nothing to do with my gear.
Hey, and welcome to this video. If you're constantly searching for better tone but still feel unhappy with how you sound, then the problem is very likely not your equipment. A lot of so-called tone hunters unknowingly turn into gear hunters, and in the process they completely overlook the most important factor when it comes to great guitar tone. That's why in this video I want to talk about how you can effectively improve your technique with just a few simple steps and potentially save yourself years or even decades of searching for the quote-unquote perfect sound. Because good technique is always the very first foundation of great guitar tone. I've deliberately divided this video into chapters so you can later work on specific techniques individually. However, for the full context, I do recommend watching the whole video all the way through at least once. When I started playing guitar almost exactly 23 years ago, the world looked very different. Digital guitar technology was still in its infancy, and most of us started out with affordable guitars and simple practice amps. I learned my fundamentals on fairly basic equipment as well, including a Fender Mexico HSS Strat, an Epiphone Les Paul Gold Top, and a Fender Rock Pro 700. And the key thing was this: during those first years, it was entirely about technique. Tone control, intonation, timing, not pedals or amps. Many guitarists start upgrading their gear after 1 or 2 years. New guitars, first pedals, hoping that their sound will automatically get better. Luckily, my guitar teacher saved me from taking that step too early. Instead of buying new toys, they advised me to keep working on my technique and only get a really good amp later on. There's a simple rule you can remember here. A mediocre guitar through a very good amp will usually sound quite decent, while an expensive guitar played through a bad amp will still sound bad and offer very few advantages. After 3 years, I finally bought my dream amp, a 1973 Marshal 100 watt Super Lead, which I had modified shortly afterwards by a very skilled technician. My second guitar teacher described this amp as an afterburner for my tone, and that description is still absolutely accurate to this day. Of course, owning my dream amp was a huge step for me and helped my playing tremendously. Suddenly everything felt easier and sounded significantly better. But what helped my development just as much beforehand was the fact that I had to struggle with my Rock Pro combo during those early years. Clean, that amp actually sounded pretty decent, which has always been one of Fender's strong points, but once you engage the distortion, it really wasn't very convincing. I still remember playing Guns N' Roses' song Estranged over and over again every single day, analyzing it literally note by note, trying to play along with Slash as accurately as possible. I was absolutely obsessed with that song. Slash's singing lead lines and endless sustain combined with beautiful feedback completely drew me in. That song is still one of the main reasons for my love of Gold Top Les Pauls to this day. With a Rock Pro at bedroom volume, sustain and feedback simply weren't options. And precisely because of that, I had to focus even more on my vibrato, finger placement and the intonation of my bends just to technically achieve what Slash was playing in that song. Here I want to show you the difference on a tonal level between my Kemper Marshal profile, which is very close to my actual sound, and a Rock Pro profile that I found in the Rig Manager. Today it's easier and more affordable than ever to get a great guitar tone at home, even at bedroom volume. Kemper, XFX, Neural DSP and other digital amp simulations offer beginners and advanced players an endless number of ways to shape their sound. In my opinion, however, this is both a blessing and a curse. Of course, hardly anyone has to struggle with a suboptimal sound for years anymore before they can afford or justify investing in a high-end amp. Even as a beginner, you can get a cool and authentic sound for relatively little money and don't have to make nearly as many compromises as in the past. On the other hand, in many cases, this also means that players don't really have to think much about precise finger placement or the execution of phrasing techniques anymore, simply because the sound works in their favor and masks mistakes and sloppy playing. Now I want to show you how you can already make a significant difference to both your technique and your tone just by placing your fingers correctly on the fretboard. Many beginners tend to place their fingers very flat on the fretboard. When playing chords, for example, they often stretch their fingers out, believing this gives them more strength. In most cases, for a clean tone and also as a foundation for good vibrato and bends, it's much better to play with as little flesh as possible, meaning fairly pointed curved fingers. The only real exceptions come later with certain licks, chords and sometimes runs where you need to mute specific strings. Next, especially if you're just starting out with single notes, it's highly recommended to synchronize both hands using chromatic exercises like this one. That means placing or lifting a finger only when your picking hand or your pick is performing an action. Only then will your run sound smooth and connected instead of choppy. Additionally, the fingers of your fretting hand should always stay very close to the fretboard when lifting them. That's the only way you'll be able to increase your speed later on. And finally, for the same reasons, try to keep multiple fingers down whenever possible. Depending on the scales, licks or runs you're playing, this will also make your playing more efficient. If you take all of these things into account and start by playing slowly and patiently, you'll notice a significant improvement in your technique very quickly. Now let's talk about vibrato. Vibrato is something very personal and is executed in many different ways by different guitarists. My vibrato has been heavily influenced by David Gilmour. His calm and even vibrato has fascinated not only me but millions of guitarists over the past decades. Early on, I mainly focused on not pulling the strings when applying vibrato. Many guitarists initially move their fingers more in one direction instead of equally up and down. My guitar teacher gave me a great tip back then when he told me to imagine a sine wave while performing vibrato, moving evenly up and down around the center line without speeding up or slowing down. At first, I focused exclusively on mastering slow vibratos, training every single finger on every string. It's also important to keep an eye on your thumb here. Depending on which notes you're playing with which finger and on which string, the thumb position will vary. Sometimes it stays behind the neck, and sometimes you should wrap it around the neck to create a more stable vibrato. Especially after fast runs, it can be quite difficult at first to keep your hand relaxed and not become hectic. After some time, once you've built a certain routine, you can start increasing the intensity. I wouldn't overdo it though, as you might otherwise lose the hard-earned control over your fingers. Also, I don't know a single guitarist known for great tone who uses a shaky, nervous vibrato. Now let's take a closer look at bends. Here again, many players don't pay enough attention to details like intonation, hand position, and once more, thumb placement. When bending, the thumb acts like an anchor, giving you more strength and making bends much easier. If you want to work on the intonation of your bends in addition to the technique itself, always try playing the target note on the same string first, memorize its pitch, and only then bend up to it. Do this gradually on every string with half-step bends, whole-step bends, and wherever possible, step and a half bends. Another great option is to play the target notes on the adjacent string and then directly compare them to the bend note. You can also expand this into unison bends. One thing I've always loved, and which is still a core part of my style today, is bend melodies. I drew a lot of inspiration for this from Jeff Beck, who mastered this technique like no other. To practice this style even more effectively, start by playing the melody without bending the notes at all. Memorize the exact sound of the pitches first, and only then add the bends. Finally, here comes the absolute supreme discipline, bends with vibrato. This is where it becomes especially difficult to keep the vibrato from sounding shaky. Your intonation also needs to be very accurate for everything to sound good. Once again, you need to clearly imagine that sine wave, otherwise the pitch can change very quickly. In addition, I can recommend practicing solos that feature this kind of band vibrato and slowing the playback down to 75 or even 50%. This forces you to play even slower controlled band vibratos. With all these technical tips, it's of course also important which notes you choose to play. And here it really helps to keep a few things in mind. What sounds beautiful and appealing is subjective to a certain extent. Some people love fast shredding with as many notes as possible, others prefer slow melodic solos. Some are drawn to dissonant tension-filled ideas, while others love sweet, simple melodies. However, if you're still at the beginning of your musical journey or currently going through a phase of reorientation, I strongly recommend playing almost exclusively slowly at first. Only then can you truly focus on all the things we've talked about in this video, even if you plan on going full throttle again later on. The most popular shredders of our time can also convince at slow tempos, and they all started out with slow licks and runs. Learn everything you can about harmony, how chords are built, how intervals work, how to play arpeggios, and try playing famous melodies everyone knows from memory. This will take you further and further away from just playing scales to playing actual music that people will connect with. As one final bonus, I've picked out one of the worst guitar sounds imaginable, this little toy Marshall. I'm going to mic it up with an SM57 and play another short improvisation just to show you that good technique can even pull the worst sound out of the dirt. And that's it for this video. I hope you had fun and were able to take a lot away for your own progress. I'll see you again in the next video. Until then, bye.